A hotel key card sat at the bottom of Gia's purse, mocking me like a snake coiled in the dark. I stood in the dim light of the kitchen, holding it between my fingers, turning it over like I was expecting it to tell me something I didn't already know. My name is Caleb Graham. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent my life working the same land my father and his father before him tilled with their bare hands. The farm's been in our family for 3 generations, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be the one to let it fall apart. The dirt, the sweat, the work, none of it scared me. You plant, you tend, you harvest. Simple as that. You don't walk away just because things get tough. Gia used to understand that. Used to love that about me. Yeah? Lately, she just looked tired. Distracted. Phone buzzing too often, her hands always fiddling with something when she talked to me. I knew something was off weeks ago. The late nights. The way she'd snap at me over nothing or laugh too loud at a joke I didn't tell. I chalked it up to stress, maybe boredom. Hell, I wasn't blind. Marriage ain't a storybook, and I wasn't the best at soft words or remembering little anniversaries. But I provided. I worked my ass off for this family. And I sure as hell didn't deserve to be played for a fool. The card had the name of some hotel an hour out, the kind of place with cheap continental breakfasts and beds people didn't stay the night in. I put it back exactly where I found it, right next to the breath mints she never used around me. That night, I climbed into bed beside her. She was already facing the other way, body curled tight like a woman who had something to hide. You gonna be home late again tomorrow? I asked, keeping my voice even. She stiffened just a little. Just enough. Book club night, she said. You know that. I nodded to myself, staring at the dark ceiling. Gia never read a damn thing unless it had a recipe in it. Right? Book club. She shifted but didn't answer. A minute later, her breathing slowed into something that almost sounded like sleep. I lay awake for hours. Not angry. Not sad. Just still. Come morning, I was up before the sun. I didn't say much when I left, just grabbed my boots, kissed my boy Xavier on the head, and stepped outside into the crisp Kentucky morning. The land stretched out before me, gold and green in the early light. The only thing in my life that had never lied to me. By noon, I was in town, sitting across from my old friend Isaac Jones at the feed store, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. Something's on your mind, Isaac said, rubbing the back of his weathered neck. He was a blunt man, didn't waste words. Probably why we got along so well. Gia's lying to me, I said. Isaac's jaw tightened. He'd been through it before, knew the weight of what I was saying. How bad? Bad enough. He exhaled sharply. Hell. I nodded, taking another sip. Hell's about right? I didn't ask for advice. I wasn't here for sympathy. I just needed to say it out loud once, let the truth sit between us. Isaac didn't waste time telling me to talk it out, work on the marriage. He knew better. Some things you fix, some things you don't. You got proof, he asked. Hotel key card, I said. She don't know I found it. Isaac grunted. You gonna confront her? Not yet. I stood, stretching my shoulders. I got work to do first. He didn't ask what I meant. Just gave a small nod. You let me know if you need anything. I clapped him on the shoulder. Appreciate it. By the time I got back home, Gia was already gone for her so-called book club. I sat on the porch, watched the sun drop below the hills, and waited. Xavier came out after a while, slumping into the chair beside me. He was 17, tall and lean, already stronger than he realized. He had my hands broad, calloused, meant for work. Ma said she might be late, he said. Yeah, I muttered. Figures. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just looked out at the fields, kicking his boot against the porch rail. You okay, Dad? He asked finally. I glanced at him, then back at the horizon. I will be. He nodded, accepting that. I liked that about Xavier, he didn't press for things that didn't need saying. Gia came home around midnight. I was still on the porch, whittling at a block of wood with my pocket knife. She pulled into the driveway slow, like a woman who didn't want to be seen coming home. When she stepped out, she jumped a little, spotting me in the dark. You scared me, she said, clutching her bag. I looked her over once, taking in the ruffled hair, the way she smelled like something other than our home. Good book? I asked. Her eyes flicked away. What? Book club? I let the words hang between us, waiting for her to squirm. Y'all read anything interesting? She swallowed. Yeah. We read that new one. About, I gave a slow nod. Sounds real compelling. She fumbled with her purse, trying too hard to act natural. I'm exhausted. I'm just gonna... Go ahead. I said, voice even. Get some rest. She disappeared inside quick, like a deer catching the scent of a hunter. I stayed on the porch a while longer, watching the dark fields stretching out under the moonlight. I wasn't mad, wasn't even hurt anymore, just waiting. because Gia Graham had made her choice. And real soon she was going to see what that meant. I didn't say a word about it the next morning. I went about my business, feeding the cattle, checking the fences, fixing the busted water pump out by the barn. The kind of work that let a man think without wasting time sitting around. Gia moved through the house quieter than usual, watching me like she was waiting for something. Maybe expecting me to say I'd had a change of heart, that I'd suddenly become blind to the scent of another man's cologne still clinging to her skin. By the time she left for work, I had my plan set. I took my truck into town and made a stop at the bank first. The farm was under my name, had been since my old man got sick. I made sure the accounts reflected that, made sure Gia wouldn't be walking away with anything but what she brought in. Next stop was the lawyer's office, a place I hadn't stepped into since signing the will after my father passed. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. A man named Weston Zimmerman handled most of the farm contracts in town. His office smelled like old books and expensive bourbon, but I wasn't here for pleasantries. "I need divorce papers drawn up," I said, laying down the key card, a printed bank statement, and a few pictures I dug up of Gia and her so-called book club nights. They weren't the kind of pictures you took with your friends. Weston adjusted his glasses and glanced over them, then let out a slow breath. "That's fairly solid proof." "Not here to debate it," I said. "Just tell me what needs signing." He nodded, shuffling through some papers before looking up. "You sure you want to do this quietly?" "No need for a show," I said. "Not yet." By noon, I was sitting at the diner off Main Street, a corner booth with a clear view of the courthouse where Gia worked. I had no appetite, just a bitter cup of coffee I let go cold. I didn't look up when Isaac slid into the seat across from me. "She still doesn't know?" he asked. "Nope." He shook his head, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Damn shame." "Yeah." We sat in silence, both watching the street outside. The town wasn't big, but it was connected. People noticed things. Car parked where it shouldn't be. A woman who suddenly wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Isaac leaned back in the booth. "How bad you want to hurt her?" I glanced at him. "I don't." He raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" I took a sip of my coffee, let the bitterness sit on my tongue. "There's a difference between hurting someone and making them face what they did." Isaac gave a small nod, satisfied. He wasn't the type to coddle a man, and I wasn't the type to need it. When Gia's lunch break rolled around, I stood, stretched my shoulders, and walked across the street. I stepped into the courthouse without hesitation, papers in hand. I knew exactly where her office was, knew the way her coworkers would glance at me, shift in their seats when they saw the look on my face. When I walked in, she was laughing at something, all bright and cheerful until her eyes landed on me. The color drained from her face so fast you'd think I'd caught her stealing from the county safe. "Caleb," she said, too high-pitched, too forced. I didn't say a word. I just walked up to her desk, set the stack of papers down right in front of her, and let my fingers tap the hotel key card sitting on top. Her mouth opened, closed. I turned and walked out before she could say another word. By the time I hit the steps, I could feel people staring. The way whispers started spreading like wildfire. Small towns don't keep secrets for long. Isaac was leaning against my truck when I reached it, arms crossed. Well, that was quick. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel a little too tight. "Ain't no point in dragging things out." Isaac chuckled, shaking his head. "Reckon she's about to learn that the hard way." I pulled onto the road, heading back toward the farm. The sky was wide and open above me, the land stretching out as far as I could see. It was mine, always had been. And no woman, no betrayal, no goddamn mistake was ever going to take that from me. Gia could keep her hotel rooms and her stolen moments in the woods with some overgrown park ranger who thought adventure was more important than keeping a family together. Me? I had a farm to run. By the time I got home, Xavier was out in the field, tossing hay into the troughs for the cattle. He'd gotten stronger this past year, shoulders filling out, hands rough from work. Good. A man ought to know the weight of what puts food on his table. He saw me pull up and wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. Something happened? I grabbed my gloves from the truck bed, flexed my fingers against the worn leather. Gave your mother some papers today. He didn't say anything right away, just leaned the pitchfork against the fence, jaw tight. She know you knew? She does now. I stepped over the fence rail, took the other fork, and started working alongside him. After a while, he asked, you gonna make her leave? I stabbed the fork into the hay pile, shook some loose. That's up to her. Papers make it clear what's what. She wants to fight it, she can. Won't change a damn thing. Xavier nodded, then kicked a bit of dirt. She didn't think about me. Not once. I turned, looked at him. He wasn't asking for comfort, wasn't looking for some fatherly wisdom. He'd already made up his mind about her. I just gave him a nod. No, son. She didn't. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the fields. Gia wasn't home when I went inside, and I didn't expect her to be. I sat at the kitchen table, poured myself a drink, and listened to the quiet. No sound of her moving around, no nervous chatter, no forced laughter. Just the steady hum of the fridge and the distant sound of Xavier finishing up outside. An hour passed. Then two. Then headlights cut across the driveway and Gia's car rolled in slow, like she wasn't sure if she should be coming back at all. She walked in with hesitation, stopped when she saw me sitting there, arms crossed, the divorce papers still right where she left them. You didn't have to humiliate me, she said, voice quiet. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. Didn't have to lie to me either. But here we are. She swallowed, shifting her purse higher on her shoulder. We can talk about this. Figure something out. There's nothing to figure, I said. You did what you did. You made a choice. Now you live with it. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling sharp. I wasn't happy, Caleb. I didn't feel I cut her off with a short laugh. You didn't feel what? Seen? Appreciated? I shook my head, tapping my fingers against the table. You ever think about how I felt? Or Xavier? You think I was just here to pay the bills and fix the damn sink while you ran off to motel rooms? Her face twisted, half anger, half shame. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. That's the thing, Gia. I stood, gripping the back of my chair. It don't matter what you meant to do. It matters what you did. She blinked hard, shoulders sagging. So, that's it? After 20 years? I stared at her, really looked at her. The woman I built a life with. The mother of my son. And now just a stranger I used to know. Yeah, I said, voice steady. That's it. She looked away, wiped at her face, then let out a short, bitter laugh. And here I thought you'd at least fight for me. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of it. Then I grabbed my drink, walked past her, and left her standing there. A woman like Gia? She was looking for a man who'd beg her to stay. A man who'd crumble, who'd try to win her back, prove he could love her better. She picked the wrong damn man. Gia didn't leave right away. She lingered for a few days, moving through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. Maybe she was waiting for me to change my mind. Maybe she thought I'd wake up one morning, see her crying at the kitchen table, and suddenly forget what she did. I didn't. The papers stayed on the counter, untouched. I never pushed, never argued, just went on with my life like she wasn't there. Got up before dawn, worked the fields, fixed the fences, sat on the porch with my coffee when the day was done. Xavier barely spoke to her. He'd come in from school, nod to me, then disappear to the barn, working longer than usual. When she tried talking to him, he kept his answers short. She lost him the second she chose herself over this family, and she knew it. Then one night, she came home late again. This time, she didn't try to lie about where she'd been. Just walked in, set her purse down, and sat across from me at the table. I was cleaning my shotgun, oiling the stock, working slow. She watched me, fingers twisting the ring she still hadn't taken off. You really don't care, do you? She finally said. I didn't look up. Care about what? About me. About us. I set the barrel aside, wiped my hands on an old rag. That's rich coming from you. She flinched. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed once, short and sharp. Well, congratulations. You failed at that too. She exhaled, rubbing her temples like she was the one dealing with a headache. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking about yourself, I said. That's all you've been thinking about for a long time. She didn't argue. Maybe she finally saw the truth of it. She swallowed hard, then nodded toward the papers on the counter. You really leaving me with nothing? I shrugged. You can have your car, your clothes. But the farm, the money, that's mine. Always was. She stared at me, waiting, like she thought I'd soften, like she thought some part of me still wanted to take care of her. I didn't. She looked away first, shoulders slumping. I'll sign them. I didn't Caleb her. Didn't say a damn thing. Just picked up my shotgun. carried it back to the rack, and left her sitting there. By the next afternoon, she was gone. I didn't watch her pack. Didn't ask where she was going. She pulled out of the driveway with 2 suitcases in the back seat and didn't look back. Neither did I. Xavier got home from school a few hours later, saw the empty space in the driveway, and nodded to himself. She finally left? I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped the cap. Yeah. He didn't ask anything else. Just took a deep breath, then grabbed his own bottle of water and joined me out on the porch. We sat there in the quiet, watching the sun dip low, the sky burning orange over our land. Feels different, he said after a while. I nodded. Yeah, lighter. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You think she'll try coming back? I took a long drink, let the silence stretch. If she does, she won't find what she's looking for. He seemed to think about that, then nodded. Good. We sat there until the last light faded, then got up to finish the evening chores. There was work to do. Always was. The first morning without her felt no different than any other. The sun still rose over the hills, the cattle still needed feeding, and the soil still waited for the hands of a man willing to put in the work. I rolled out of bed before dawn, the way I always had, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside into the crisp Kentucky air. If anything, the house was quieter. Not the kind of quiet that feels hollow, the kind that feels settled. Xavier was already outside, leaning against the barn, his breath visible in the cold morning air. He'd been up before me more often lately, taking on more of the farm work without being asked. He looked over as I approached. We should cut that back field today, he said, nodding toward the stretch of overgrown pasture beyond the fence. I adjusted my hat, glanced toward it. Yeah, it's about time. He gave a short nod and started toward the tractor without another word. No hesitation. No waiting for me to tell him what to do. A man learns what needs doing, then does it. As we worked, the sun rose higher, burning off the morning chill. The air smelled of cut grass and earth, the steady hum of the tractor filling the space between us. After a while, Xavier pulled his gloves off, wiped his forehead, and leaned against the wheel. Saw Ma at the gas station yesterday, he said, voice even. I kept stacking bales. Yeah. She was in Jonas Zimmerman's truck. Didn't see me. He paused, picked at the frayed edge of his glove. She looked like hell. I didn't say anything right away. I figured she'd end up with him. He was the whole reason she threw her life away in the first place. But men like Jonas? They weren't the settling kind. He liked his freedom, his adventures, his nights in rented beds. Gia thought she'd found something exciting. What she really found was a man who had no use for her once the thrill was gone. She'll learn, I finally said, tossing another bale onto the trailer. Xavier exhaled, long and slow. Ain't our problem, is it? I shook my head. No, son, it ain't. We finished the field by mid-afternoon. Dirt streaked on our faces, sweat soaking into our shirts. The work felt good. Honest. When we got back to the house, Isaac Jones's truck was parked in the drive, dust still settling around the tires. He stepped out, stretching his back. Damn. You two look like you wrestled a whole herd out there. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler in the bed of my truck and tossed it to him. Something like that. Isaac cracked it open, took a long swig. Heard Gia's shacked up in town. Rumor is, Zimmerman ain't too keen on playing house. I nodded once, not bothering to comment. Isaac smirked. You're a cold bastard, Caleb. I shrugged. Ain't got nothing to say about what ain't mine no more. He let out a low chuckle. Fair enough. Figured I'd swing by, see if you needed an extra set of hands around here. Got more time on my hands these days. I glanced at Xavier, who gave a small nod. We could use the help, and Isaac was a man who knew how to work. You know where the tools are, I said. Isaac grinned, clapped me on the shoulder. That's what I like about you, Caleb. Straight to business. By the time evening rolled around, we'd put in a full day's work, the farm in better shape than it had been in months. I stood on the porch, beer in hand, looking out over the land. Gia was probably out there somewhere, sitting in the passenger seat of a truck that didn't belong to her, waiting for a man who had no intention of staying. Me? I had everything I needed, right where I stood. The days settled into a rhythm the way they always did. Work needed doing, and I did it. The farm didn't care about the past, didn't care about mistakes or regrets. The land needed tending, the cattle needed feeding, and that was that. Xavier took on more responsibility without me having to say a word about it. He was up before dawn, working beside me, handling things the way a man should. Isaac came by most days, lending a hand where needed, and between the three of us, the place was running smoother than ever. One afternoon, I was loading bags of seed into the truck bed outside the feed store when a familiar voice cut through the quiet. "Caleb." I turned. Sheriff Tom Gregory stood near the entrance, boots planted firm, hands resting on his belt like he was getting ready to deliver bad news. "Tom," I greeted, tossing the last bag in place. "Something I should know about?" He let out a slow breath. "Gia." I wiped my hands on my jeans, leaning against the truck. "What about her?" "She came in this morning," he said. Crying, carrying on. Saying she made a mistake, saying she doesn't know where else to go. He watched me close, probably waiting to see if I'd soften. I didn't. "She looking for pity or money?" I asked. "Both probably." Tom scratched his chin. "She's got nowhere to stay. Giannis is done with her. Told her to pack her things and get out." I nodded, not the least bit surprised. "She didn't ask for you directly," he continued, "but it was clear she was hoping I'd come knocking, maybe convince you to take her back." I laughed once, shaking my head. "She can hope all she wants." Tom let the silence stretch, then sighed. "Just figured I'd let you know. You want me to tell her anything?" I met his eyes. "Tell her I ain't a charity." Tom gave a small nod, like that was the answer he expected, then tipped his hat. "Take care, Caleb." He walked off, leaving me to finish my work. I wasn't mad. Wasn't even surprised. Gia made her choices, and now she had to live with them. It wasn't my job to pick up the pieces. That night, Xavier and I sat on the porch, the night air cool, cicadas humming in the distance. He sipped his water, then set it down on the step beside him. "Ma's real messed up, huh?" "Looks that way," I said. "She come back around, you gonna let her in?" I took a slow sip of my beer, let the weight of the question settle. "No." Xavier nodded like he already knew the answer. "She ever ask you for anything, you tell me," I said. "She's still your mother, but she don't get to use you to fix what she broke." He took a deep breath, staring out over the land. "She ain't my problem anymore, Dad." I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't a boy anymore. Wasn't some kid looking for guidance. He understood things now, understood the way the world worked. "Good," I said, tipping my bottle toward him. "That's how it should be." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The farm was quiet, steady, unchanged. A man can live a whole life out here, build something real, something that lasts. Gia thought she was looking for something better. Turned out she had it all along. Too bad for her. A year passed and life carried on, just like it always did. The farm stayed running, the seasons turned, and I didn't waste time looking back. Some men get stuck in the past, chewing on it like an old piece of gristle that never softens. I wasn't one of them. What was done was done. Xavier went off to the agricultural college in Lexington like we'd planned, though he came back most weekends to work the farm. He'd earned that choice, and I didn't hold him back. A man needs to see what's out there before he decides where he belongs. But I saw it in him every time he came home. This land was in his bones, same as it was in mine. Isaac stuck around, helping out more often, and somewhere along the way I just started paying him outright. Didn't need to say much about it. He showed up, worked hard, and at the end of the week I handed him an envelope. No discussion, no debate. He'd earned it. One day, I was at the county fair, selling produce at our usual booth, shaking hands, talking shop with the locals, when a man I didn't recognize walked up. Stiff posture, suit too clean for a place like this. I pegged him for law enforcement before he even opened his mouth. "You Caleb Graham?" he asked, flipping open a badge. I glanced at it. "FBI." I set down the crate I was lifting. "Depends on what you're asking." He smirked a little like he appreciated the answer. "You know a Giannis Zimmerman?" I let out a short breath through my nose, shaking my head. "Not personally." "Well, you'll be happy to hear he's in custody," the agent said, slipping the badge back into his pocket. "Turns out he's been under investigation for years. Illegal poaching, bribery, smuggling endangered species. He finally screwed up bad enough for us to slap cuffs on him." I didn't react. Didn't smile, didn't gloat. "That's so. It is. And here's the interesting part. Seems your ex-wife was still with him when we picked him up. We've got her name in some of his accounts, payments made in her name." I stayed quiet, waiting. The agent shifted, watching my face. If we find out she was involved, things could get real bad for her. I met his eyes, steady and unreadable. Sounds like a her problem. He studied me for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Just thought you'd want to know. He walked off, and I turned back to my booth, picking up right where I left off. The fair went on, the world kept turning, and somewhere out there, Gia was learning that some men don't come to the rescue. That night, Xavier and I sat out on the porch again, same as we always did. He had a beer in his hand now, his first legal one after his birthday last week. He took a sip, watching the dark stretch of the fields. Ma's name's caught up in Giannis's mess, I said, setting my bottle down on the railing. He thought about that, then took another drink. Figures. She might call, I said. Might ask for help. He smirked. She won't like what she hears. I let out a low chuckle. No, she won't. We sat there a while, the night air thick with the scent of cut grass and earth, the sky wide and clear above us. Some folks spend their whole lives chasing something, thinking they're missing out on what's just over the horizon. Gia was one of them. Me? I had everything I needed right here. Always had.